Okay, hi everyone. So today, as you know, it's our last class, and we will mostly discuss homework 5 and homework 4. Um, so let's start with the last homework, the homework 5, which I guess all of you have just submitted. Okay, so let's start with the first problem, which is probably one of the simpler ones. So in problem 1, you are given two commitment schemes, and they are possibly defective in the sense that maybe hiding doesn't hold or maybe binding doesn't hold. Okay, and the first part says that you are given two commitment schemes, and both satisfy the binding property, but only one of them satisfies the hiding property. So let's call them COM1 and COM2. So problem 1.1. So we have COM1 and we have COM2, right? Both of them are hiding, but only one of both of them are hiding, only one of them is binding. Sorry, the first one is both are binding, and only one of them satisfies the hiding property. So now given a message M that you want to commit to, so here the idea is we will use just a 2 out of 2 secret sharing scheme. So we will divide our message into two parts, M0 and M1, given M, and we will use 2 of 2 secret sharing schemes. So what this means is that even if one of the shares is leaked, you have no information about the actual message, right? And then your commitment of the message M is specified as follows. So COM is the final commitment scheme which we are building, which is supposed to be secure. So this is just COM1 of M0 concatenated with COM2 of M1, right? And both are binding. So what about the binding property? This follows from the fact that COM1 and COM2, they are both binding. If they are both binding, that means that M0 and M1 are unique, it's fixed, which in turn means that M is also unique. How does hiding work? So hiding is based on the following fact. Uh, at least one of these commitment schemes is hiding, right? So at least one of M0 comma M1 is hidden in some sense. And if that is the case, then 2 out of 2 secret sharing scheme already implies that the message is implies that M is hidden. Okay.
So, a small question in this one.
Yeah.
Can we use COM of like the composition of COMs?
You mean COM1 of COM2
COM2.
of M?
Yes.
Yeah, that should also be fine, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Now in 1.2, both commitment schemes satisfy the hiding property, but only one of them satisfy the binding property. So this is easier. This is just you just commit to the same message twice. So this is defined as com1 of m and com2 of m. So you commit to the same message twice, and when you're decommitting or when you're opening, you have to open to both of them. And the receiver checks if these two messages are the same, and only then the opening is accepted, right? So because one of them is binding, that means that the message m is already fixed. It's unique after the commitment stage. So binding is follows from the fact that at least one is binding. And this means that you can only change your message in the other one, but that's not going to help you. You have to change the message in both because the message inside both is supposed to be the same. And hiding relies on the fact that both are hiding. Right? Now let's move on to question 1.3. And there were many questions, many students were confused about this. Hint maybe was not so clear. So here, first observe that the question says that you're only allowed to use the given two commitment schemes as a building block. You're not allowed to use any further unproven cryptographic assumptions. Okay. So let's see in 1.3, one is hiding and one is binding. And first, my claim is that if you are given one scheme which is hiding, if you are given another scheme which is binding, you are essentially given nothing as far as cryptography is concerned. Because what is a binding commitment scheme?
The identity
How can
function.
how can I construct a binding commitment scheme if I don't need the hiding property? Yeah. Just send the message m. So committer sends the message m in clear to the receiver. And this is clearly a binding commitment scheme, but it's not hiding. How do I build a hiding commitment scheme which is not binding?
One-time pad.
Sorry?
One-time pad. If your XOR is the randomness.
Well, sure, but I mean, why not just send bot?
Or just send randomness. Whatever.
Just don't talk, right?
Yeah,
If you
that
don't
works too.
talk, then obviously your secret is hidden. That's all we need. Yeah, constant function is fine. So neither of these required any cryptographic assumptions. We didn't need to assume factoring. We didn't need to assume one-way functions and so on. On the other hand, commitment schemes imply a one-way function. So you are given in the hint that any good commitment scheme, both hiding and binding, implies a one-way function. And this is easy to see because given the commitment to some value, let's say the message, and so remember that a commitment scheme has two inputs. First is the message and other is the randomness. And R, given these, if you could recover M and R or any equivalent of M and R, then you have broken the hiding property, right? So any good commitment scheme implies a one-way function, and that follows from the hiding property. And this means that given these two commitment schemes alone, without unproven cryptographic assumptions, you will not be able to build a new commitment scheme unless you yourself prove that one-way functions exist. So this means that you need one-way functions for building COM. This means that either need unproven cryptographic assumptions, or what is the option if you don't want to use unproven cryptographic assumptions? The only other option that you have is to prove that these assumptions are actually true, or prove one-way functions unconditionally exist, which in particular requires proving that P is not equal to NP. Right? So, I mean, realistically, your only hope is to rely on unproven cryptographic assumptions if you want to build commitment schemes. And I can make the same statement about encryption, digital signatures, almost everything that we saw in the class, maybe with the possible exception of one-time pad and secret sharing. Almost everything else required unproven cryptography, one-way functions at the very least. Okay, so let's move on to the second problem. Yeah, the second problem requires you to build a zero knowledge proof. And this is for what is known as the vertex cover problem. Okay, the problem is defined as follows. So you are given a graph. So you are given, second problem, you are given a graph G. The graph consists of vertices and edges. Most of the time, graph will be represented as a matrix. If there are n vertices, then you are looking at a matrix of n by n. And you are given a positive integer bound B. Okay. Now the question is, does there exist a subset of vertices of size at most B such that this subset covers all the edges in some sense? So look at any edge, at least one of the n points will be inside this set S. And maybe I should take an example. So let's look at the star graph. So here we have a node in the middle, and basically every other node is connected to that node, and that's the whole graph, nothing else. So what is a vertex cover in this graph? So here we can have a very simple vertex cover, which is just this vertex in the middle. So we have a vertex cover of size 1. And why is this a vertex cover? Because you look at any edge in this graph, and one of the endpoints is this vertex, which is inside our vertex cover. What if I add another edge here? Then this is no longer the vertex cover, because you look at this edge, no longer this edge which I added, it doesn't have any endpoints in the vertex cover. So we need to expand and maybe have this one as well. So given a graph, finding the minimum vertex cover, the minimum sized vertex cover, it's known to be an NP-complete problem. And yeah, and let's say the prover does have the vertex cover of size less than B. And now the goal is to design a zero knowledge proof using which the prover can prove to the verifier that there exists a vertex cover of size B while hiding the vertex cover and any other knowledge. So how does the protocol work? So let me just say in the beginning that there are multiple protocols here, and maybe I'll present to you what I think is probably the most natural, but it doesn't mean that every other solution is wrong. Okay, so whenever you are dealing with graphs and you are thinking about zero knowledge, permuting the graph is always a very useful operation, right? So this is what we will start with. So we have a prover and we have the verifier. As the first step, the prover permutes. So this is step 1. Prover permutes G to get, let's say, G prime, which is equal to pi of G. So pi is a random permutation. What is a random permutation? Well, I am just renaming all the vertices, right? So vertex 1 becomes vertex 3, maybe vertex 2 becomes vertex 9, and so on, just at random. And this sort of gives me a new graph, and prover commits to the whole graph G prime. And what do I mean when I say commit to the graph G prime? So let me denote the size of the vertices by n. So the graph has n vertices. So this commit to G prime means in other words, commit to n square values. So this is an n by n matrix where I comma j, the value I comma j is 1 if and only if vertex I and vertex j are connected. Okay, this matrix representation is the most common representation for graphs. So prover, of course, every value is hidden at this point. Prover has no idea what is being committed. Some graph, right? The prover just simply, sorry, the verifier. I'm talking about the verifier. The verifier has no idea what is being committed. The verifier just sends a challenge bit. Let's call it challenge, which is equal to either 0 or 1. If the challenge is 0, then you need to show the prover that G prime is indeed a permutation of G. So I didn't commit to something completely different, right? So if CH equals 0, send the permutation pi, open all the commitments. So reveal the entire graph G prime, send the permutation pi, and the prover is supposed to verify that G prime is indeed isomorphic to G. So note that in this case, the prover never used the witness, which is the vertex cover. Now, if the challenge equals 1, then the verifier is willing to believe that graph G prime is the right one, but you need to show that G prime has a small enough vertex cover. Okay, so let's say if CH equals 1, then open all edges sort of outside the vertex cover. And I'll explain in more detail what I mean here. So, okay, so let's see. Let's denote the vertex cover by something. So let's say the vertex cover is some set S of vertices, and the size of this vertex cover is B. It could be less than B, but let's pick B vertices. So in other words, what I mean here is that you send the set S so you look at all vertices outside the set S, and let's denote it by, say, V prime minus S. Open all edges with both endpoints in V prime minus S. So all entries of the matrix corresponding to V prime minus S. So V prime minus S, these are all the vertices outside the vertex cover. And V checks if all entries are 0. Okay, there's not supposed to be an edge which is completely outside the vertex cover. So outside the vertex cover, basically the prover reveals all the entries, and the verifier checks all of these are 0. Right? Okay, so now let's try to describe a simulator, and this is the whole protocol. Of course, you can cheat here with probability half, but as usual, you can repeat it sequentially.
How is the verifier checking the set S is has size less than bound B?
Well, the verifier looks at how many entries of the matrix are revealed.
But the matrix just tells you like,
The verifier knows what B is. The verifier knows what V is.
but this is the permuted graph, right? Like,
But the permuted graph is supposed to have the same number of vertices. So in other words, let's look at this matrix, which has size n by n. And I am pointing to certain rows of the matrix and certain columns, and I am revealing all of them. And here, the number of rows which are revealed should be at least B. So essentially, it should be not B.
n minus.
Yeah, size of V minus B, and you need to reveal size of B, V minus B times size of V minus B entries. So you need to select V minus B rows, V minus B columns. That would select these many entries, and the prover is supposed to open all those commitments.
But like a dishonest prover might reveal less
Well, the verifier can count how many commitments
No,
are
sorry,
open.
more. Like,
Well, more is fine, right? It's not clear how more helps a dishonest.
yeah, more. Okay, and one small question. When CH is equal to 0, right? The challenge is 0. You opened another matrix, right? But this, like, checking one matrix is isomorphic to another matrix is like
So
exponential,
that's
right?
why you also send this permutation pi.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. So now let's look at the simulator.
Okay.
Soundness is clear, right? Completeness is clear. The simulator is very simple. So simulator will guess the challenge of the verifier, and based on that, the simulator either commits to a G prime which is isomorphic to G, or the simulator can commit to an empty graph without any edges. Okay, so simulator picks CH prime, which is a guess for the challenge CH. If CH prime is 0, commit to a graph G prime, which is pi of G.
टफ है यार ये लिखना तो.
Else, commit to an empty graph. What is an empty graph?
सारे 0
Without any
हैं.
edges. Okay, the verifier sends V star sends CH. So if CH prime is different from CH, then you rewind. Else you can proceed. Right? So if CH prime and CH are the same, then clearly the simulator is going to be successful. And why? Because if CH is 0, then the simulator did indeed commit to a graph which is the permutation. And if CH is 1, then basically my graph had no edges at all, and hence revealing these many entries and the verifier checking that there are no edges, that's not going to be a problem. Okay, so we have a good simulator. And there's a question here. Do we need to commit to the permutation? Well, I don't think committing to the permutation is necessary. If you want, you can do it, but it's not clear what the prover can gain by changing the permutation later on.
Well, just that it's NP intermediate, so the verifier has to be fast enough.
Sorry, say that again.
Just that the problem of checking the isomorphism would be hard for the verifier to do in polynomial time.
So you don't need to commit to the permutation. You can just send the permutation in the third round. But the question was, do we need to commit to
That's
the
fair. They could
permutation
just
phi as well?
Yeah, they could just send the permutation. That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
So the soundness of the protocol is half, right?
Yeah, the soundness of the protocol is half.
Thank you.
And this is actually better than graph 3 culling. Soundness of the protocol for graph 3 culling was much worse. Depends on the size of the graph. So in some sense, this is actually a better protocol for zero knowledge for NP compared to the one which we discussed in the class. And I don't have time to go through the hybrid argument in detail, but the basic idea is you look at both cases, challenge 0 and challenge 1, and you try to argue that real and the simulated transcripts look indistinguishable, right? So if challenge is 0, then real and the simulated transcript, they're actually identical, because in both cases, the verifier gets the commitment of a graph G, which is indeed a random permutation of the original graph, and the verifier learns the random permutation and the entire graph. So there's no difference. But now for CH equals 1, there is some difference, right? Because in CH equals 1, all the entries which are being committed are 0 as far as the simulator is concerned. Whereas the actual prover will not commit to an all 0 graph. But now the point is, you have the hiding of the commitment scheme, and then the only edges which are being opened, they are 0, both in simulated as well as in the real transcript. So that's sort of the rough sketch. So could you go over the soundness calculation? Yeah. So let's look at soundness. So in soundness, we are assuming that the statement is false, which means that there is no vertex cover of size B. Okay. So now the honest prover P star has two choices. Case 1, and I'm doing it a little bit informally. Case 1 is G prime is not isomorphic to G. Okay, then V rejects if CH equals 0. So in the first step, the dishonest prover is supposed to commit to a graph, G prime. This graph could be anything, right? But there are only two possibilities. Either this graph G prime is not isomorphic to G, and in that case, the verifier rejects if the challenge is 0. Because if the challenge is 0, you need to show isomorphism. Case 2, G prime is actually isomorphic to G, which means that the first message was honest. And in that case, the verifier will reject if the challenge is 1, because if the challenge is 1, you actually need to show a vertex cover. You do need to show that there are all these edges, and there are all these vertices, and basically no edges left outside the vertex cover. Okay, so regardless of what strategy the cheating prover follows, the verifier continues to reject with probability at least half. Any questions?
But like in the second case, there is still a negligible probability, right, that the P star like just somehow guesses the right like vertex cover. But there's a very
There's no
negligible.
point.
Well, there does not exist any vertex cover which is of this size. It's not about whether it's easy to compute or hard to compute. In soundness, we are considering the case when the statement is just false.
Okay, you are saying there won't exist any. Okay, okay. Thank you.
So now let's look at problem 3 and 4. Well, 3 and 4 are not that different. So in problem 3, you are given sort of a hard language. So let L be a language which is not decidable in expected PPT. So no efficient algorithm that on input X with probability 3/4 outputs 1 if X is L and 0 otherwise. So, the way to interpret it is L has no expected PPT algorithm. Which gives you the correct answer, which works with probability at least 3/4. So this is your starting point, and you have to show that there cannot exist a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof system. What is a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof system? Prover just sends a single message to the verifier. So now I will solve this problem with contradiction, using contradiction. So given a Nizhik system for L, consider the following ePPT algorithm A. So I'll build an algorithm which can solve this problem L. So this algorithm works as follows. So given the instance X, right? A invokes the simulator S for the Nizhik system. Say S outputs some proof. Let's call this proof this P. Now run the verifier V on this proof P. If V accepts X is in L, else X is not in L. So this is my candidate algorithm. And now I have to show that this algorithm works correctly for deciding the language. First of all, observe that this algorithm is indeed expected PPT because this algorithm is just invoking the simulator, which is expected PPT. And then this algorithm is invoking the verifier, which is polynomial time. So A is expected PPT.
Does a verifier for the Nizhik system is always polynomial time, or it can be EPPT also, right?
I mean, generally it's polynomial time, but sure, yeah, even if depends on the exact definition. I think in zero knowledge, we defined our verifier to be just polynomial time.
But like we always pick some random element, right? So doesn't that make it EPPT? Okay, sorry. No.
Yeah, okay. But it's not expected PPT, it's PPT.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sir.
So now let's consider two cases. Suppose X is in L. Let's call it case 1. So I'll consider two cases, X in L and X is not in L. And I'll show that my algorithm A works correctly in both cases, mostly correctly. If X is in L, then the simulator S outputs some proof pi, which is accepted by the verifier V with probability at least 1 minus negligible. Why is this the case?
We have a computationally indistinguishable transcript to a real transcript.
Yeah, if X is in L, then if the verifier interacts with the honest prover, the verifier will always accept with probability 1. And hence, if the verifier interacts with the simulator, the verifier must also accept with probability very close to 1. This follows from the zero knowledge property. Or maybe this follows from the indistinguishability of real and simulated. Okay, so if X is in L, well, our algorithm is doing very well. Our algorithm is actually saying X is in L with probability 1 minus negligible. What if X is not in L? And here we are hoping to rely on the soundness property. Then my claim is that if that is the case, then the simulator outputs rho accepted by V with only negligible probability. And why is this the case? This actually follows from soundness. And this is where we are using the fact that the proof system is one round. So soundness, else a cheating prover P star can use S to get rho and convince the verifier V with noticeable probability. If X is not in L, then the simulator better not produce a valid proof. Otherwise, you can use the simulator to cheat, basically.
Sir, what is the importance of the last step in the algorithm that you wrote? Like, why do we need to run V again?
Why do we need to run V?
Like basically we run V on the proof message, right?
Oh, you mean this?
Yes, yeah. Basically, I'm trying to say that the last round of the simulator with the V,
Mhm,
with using which it generates the transcript, right? It
mhm.
is very same to running V on P again, because like even if X does not belong to L, the simulator will, like, simulator also cannot do anything because it is a Nizhik system.
No, but the simulator outputs some proof, right? How do you know if the proof is valid or not?
Proof is valid, meaning?
I mean, so the simulator out might even output some junk if X is not in L, right?
Okay,
So,
then
so what is the algorithm that you're proposing? If you don't run V,
yes. So like basically
then
there will be a output message of the verifier. Like we invoke the simulator with the honest verifier. There will be like the output message of the verifier also in the end. So if simulator uses some junk in the first Nizhik message, the verifier will output reject in the
okay,
second
yeah,
message.
we are saying the same thing. So you are saying that simulator already feeds the proof to the verifier and gives the output.
Something like that. Yes. Basically, like asking a bigger question here, like that in a Nizhik system, like the simulator itself cannot make an X not belonging to L being accepted by the verifier, which it can do in a non-Nizhik system.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's no difference between what we are doing and between what you have in mind.
Thanks.
It's I'm just saying that the simulator outputs something and you need to feed to the verifier and see accept or reject.
Okay. Thanks.
So
So
note that as we defined, the simulator only gives you a protocol transcript. Simulator is not supposed to give you what the verifier outputs. So that's why we are doing this.
Isn't that part of the transcript?
Transcript is just all the public messages between the prover and the verifier. And at the end, the verifier output is supposed to be a private output. Like the verifier doesn't need to go back to the prover and say, hey, I rejected or hey, I accepted.
Okay. Okay.
What to do with the accept reject bit, that's up to the verifier. It's not
Okay.
part of the definition.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good. So yeah, this is, I mean, this essentially proves that our algorithm A is sort of giving you the correct answer except with negligible probability. In fact, much better than the 3/4 probability which the question is asking you to do.
I have two questions here.
Yeah,
So firstly, why does the soundness argument not work if it's a interactive proof?
good. If it's an interactive proof, then P star does not have the luxury of running the simulator S,
Oh yeah, yeah, right, right,
because the simulator might rewind the verifier, and in real life, you cannot rewind your peer. You cannot rewind the party that you are talking to.
right, right. And
So,
second
so
question,
at a very high level, forget about this question. If you just want the intuition, why can't we have a one round zero knowledge proof? Well, in one round zero knowledge proof, it's not clear how the simulator is going to work. Normally, our simulator rewinds the verifier, and that sort of compensates for the fact that the simulator doesn't have the witness. In non-interactive zero knowledge, well, there's no extra power which the simulator has over a cheating prover.
right, right. Okay. And second question is, so P star is supposed to be PPT, and over here it's using S, which is ePPT.
Mhm.
And that should not be allowed, right? For the sake of the soundness argument.
Okay, yeah. So this is a good question, but any ePPT algorithm can be truncated and you can convert it to PPT. with just some small change in success probability.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sir, I'm sorry if this is a very stupid question, but can you please clarify the difference between ePPT and PPT once, please?
Okay, good. So think about flipping a coin. So I keep flipping a coin until I get heads, right? So this is not a PPT algorithm, because whatever upper bound you specify, there's always some non-zero probability that I might exceed that, right? If I'm very lucky, I do it a billion times and I keep getting tails and I don't terminate. But this is in expectation, this is polynomial. So this is ePPT because in expectation, I just need like 2 trials.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
And that's why the simulators that we are building, they're always ePPT because they have to guess the challenge of the verifier.
So PPT is just a polynomial time algorithm that does a random experiment also.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Any other questions about 3? So once you have solved 3, then 4 is like almost like free. So now we are not asking for non-interactive or anything like that. We are asking for deterministic zero knowledge. But note that if V is deterministic, then it implies that P can compute messages of V on its own, which also means that we can convert it to a non-interactive zero knowledge system. So the interaction only makes sense if I don't know your message, right? If you are deterministic, algorithm is anyway always public, then I'm talking to a deterministic party whose algorithm I know, then I can already sort of anticipate what message you will send to me, right? And then I can already calculate the reply. And again, I can anticipate your next message, I can calculate the reply. So I can compute the entire transcript on my own if I am the prover. And then I just send you the whole transcript. And then you can compute your messages, you can make sure that your messages were computed correctly, and then you can go through the whole transcript and then you can accept or reject. And in problem 3, we already ruled out NISQ systems. So building a deterministic zero knowledge is in some sense even harder than building NISQ. So let's move on to problem 5. Okay. So problem 5 introduced the notion of witness indistinguishability, which is a very popular notion which is used in cryptography. So normally in zero knowledge, we sort of we want to make sure that prover learns absolutely nothing. Sorry, the verifier learns absolutely nothing from the prover. The whole interaction can be computed by the verifier on his own. in witness indistinguishability, maybe there are like two possible witnesses. Prover wants to hide which of these two witnesses they are using. And the question asks for building a 3-round witness indistinguishable proof system with soundness parameter very close to 1. And note that we don't have anything like that for zero knowledge, because for zero knowledge you only get soundness half, and then you need to repeat sequentially. And then there was a class in which I explained why parallel repetition does not work for zero knowledge. This is because if there are too many parallel sessions, then the simulator has to guess too much at a time. So thankfully for witness indistinguishability, you can do it one session at a time. So there are sort of two transcripts. So tau 0 is generated using the first witness. And what are the witnesses? W0 and W1. Tau 1 is generated using W1. And my goal is to prove that tau 0 is computationally indistinguishable from tau 1. And my protocol is going to be just a parallel repetition of the graph 3 culling protocol. So let's look at the first hybrid. This is the same as tau 0. So let's say I have n sessions, which means I'm taking the protocol and I'm repeating it in parallel n times. And again, just to remind you, parallel repetition, we have already talked about parallel repetition in one of our classes. It's just that the prover sends the first round message of all the n sessions at the same time. Then the verifier gives the challenge for all the n sessions again in one go. And then the prover responds in all the n sessions at one go. So just three messages total in the protocol. So in hybrid 1, change the witness used in session 1 from W0 to W1. Okay, and we will continue in hybrid I. Change witness in session I from 0 to W1. And then hybrid N will be your transcript tau 1. So you have n parallel sessions. You start with W0 in all of them, and then you slowly change it to W1. And let's try to prove, for example, let's try to have a claim. My claim is hybrid 0 is computationally indistinguishable from hybrid 1. And now the idea is that the only change between hybrid 0 and hybrid 1 is in a single session. Okay, so there are multiple options here. either you can just rely on the fact that witness indistinguishability is implied by the zero knowledge property. And if you look at a single session, we already proved that the three round graph trickle ring protocol is zero knowledge. Another option is we can try to do it more explicitly, and maybe that will be helpful. So maybe let's try to do it a little more explicitly. How much time do I have? Okay, I do have 20 minutes. Okay, so say there exists a PPT adversary which can actually distinguish. Then we will build another algorithm B to break zero knowledge in session 1. So B has W0 and W1. So B runs the algorithm A. Session 1 comes from the challenger, the challenge prover. 2 to n are run by B using the witness W1. And then if A distinguishes, B can break the witness indistinguishability in session 1, which violates the zero knowledge property.
Sir, but the verifier that the A uses and the B uses are different, right? B is using a single session verifier and like constructing a transcript, you combining n of those, right? But the verifier that A is using, it has all the n things together, and then it can maybe do things that like it can see one and the nth transcript together, like.
Yeah.
But
So the point here, which maybe is the key point, is that the remaining sessions, they are run internally by B. So in those sessions, B is acting as the prover and A is acting as the verifier. And B can just run those sessions honestly using the witness W0. Because in those sessions, anyway, there's no change between H0 and H1. And note that even if you have the witness, you are not supposed to be able to guess which witness the prover is using.
I'm just trying to say that the distinguisher A, right? Like it is using a verifier that's like a parallel verifier, and B is using a verifier that is a single session verifier. So when B constructs the transcript to be fed to A, right? That is a transcript that is a bit different than what the original verifier could have output.
Yeah. So what is the difference? The difference is that session 2 to session n are missing.
No. The what I'm trying to say is that the difference is that using like when B runs it, B cannot take information within sessions and combine them to do something. But when A's verifier does it, it can take information within sessions and try to find out something. That is the difference.
Yeah. I mean, which means that session 2 and n are missing, right? That's the main difference.
Session 2 and n are missing.
So Okay, let me draw a picture here. So here is our algorithm B which we are designing, and here is our challenge prover, and here is the algorithm A. So the prover sends a single message in session 1 to B. And now B has to give messages from n sessions to A, right?
Right.
Now what does B put here? Because B is not getting this from the challenger. So these 2 to n, these are honest sessions using W1, using W0 as the witness.
Yes, that is correct. But I'm saying that 2 to n are individual sessions. But what A requires are that 1 to n should be given together, because
Yeah,
the
we are
verifier.
giving them together to A. We are sending all the messages together to A. And then A responds back. A might take all of these messages, maybe hash the challenge. A responds with all the challenges. And then only this challenge is now forwarded to the challenger. The remaining challenges, there's no rewinding. They are answered honestly by by B using the witness W0. And here we get the response which B will include. So these messages are all computed by B directly by using knowledge of the witness W0. Okay, does this make sense?
I probably will ask after the class once.
Okay, sure. Okay, so yeah, this is hybrid 0 and hybrid 1, and the idea for hybrid I and J is the same. And note that there is only a polynomial number of hybrids, just n sessions. So this allows us to show that these two transcripts are computationally indistinguishable. Okay, so given that I only have 10 minutes, problem 6 was probably the easiest. Let me try to give a very brief idea. So in part 1, you are given a 1 out of 4 string oblivious transfer, and you are supposed to build a 1 out of 2 string oblivious transfer. So this was almost entirely trivial. The parties are semi-honest, right? So you are supposed to use 1 out of 4 string oblivious transfer in a black box way. So we have the sender and we have the receiver. So sender, let's say, has 2 inputs, A0 and A1. The receiver has a bit B. So what the sender will do, sender will prepare A0, A1, and in the other 2 places, the sender will just put 0. Okay, and the receiver will either ask for this bit or this bit. So essentially, we use 1 out of 4 oblivious transfer. We just don't use the position 3 and position 4 in any meaningful way. And next, you are given a 1 out of 4 string oblivious transfer, which supports sender inputs of n bits. You have to build another protocol which supports sender inputs of much larger length. And how do you do that? This 6.1, 6.2. So first of all, you sample 4 seeds. So you have the sender samples S1, S2, S3, S4, 4 random, completely random seeds. And the receiver maybe downloads one of them depending upon which message the receiver needs. And then sender publicly sends M1 XOR G of S1 up to M4 XOR G of S4. Right? So forget about the OT. If you look at this message alone, receiver has no idea about any of the messages because PRG sort of acts as a one-time pad. On the other hand, if you get one of the seeds, then you can compute, let's say if you get S3, you can compute G of S3, which would allow you to recover M3. Okay, so if you only get one seed, you only get one message. And here you can use a PRG, which has stretch 0, 1, which is like this. Okay, any questions? So now let me look at the third homework. Yeah, the homework 4. So in question 1, homework 4, and let's look at the first problem. So in the first problem, you have several strings. You can also think of them as several messages. And you encrypt all of them individually. You store them on the server. And you need to retrieve summation Ci, Si, where I is in some set A. Right? So you get some set A, which you are interested in. And you have these constants Ci, and you want to obtain summation Ci Si. So some linear combination of the messages. That's what you're interested in. In addition, you are given the fact that all these Ci's, all these Si's are pretty small. So Ci, I, they are all small integers. N can be assumed to be a constant as well. So here we will use a very simple variant of Elgamal. Key generation remains the same. So secret key is X, and the public key is G to the power X. How do I encrypt some message? encryption under the public key of some message. Let's call it S. So this is defined to be g to the power r, where r is a random number, and g to the power xr times, in Elgamal you had s. Here we will put g to the power s. Okay. Now how do you decrypt this? Any thoughts on how the decryption will work?
We're
And
told all the numbers S were small, right?
sorry?
We were told all the numbers S were small in this problem, right?
Yeah.
So that we could just like brute force multiplying g squared, g cubed until we got it.
Exactly. Yeah. So the decryption process, as usual, you will first recover g to the power s, right? Just using Elgamal decryption. And then you recover s by just brute force. S is small, s is a constant, so constant number of exponentiations, that's all you need. You compute g to the power n1, g to the power 2, just match it with g to the power s. Now, why is this scheme good enough for us? So let's see. So you are given a set A, you are given all the ciphertexts in this set, and then you are given these little constants Ci. Okay, compute another ciphertext C, which is the product of all the Ci first component, comma, product of all Ci second component. So I am denoting it as ciphertext has two components. And I is in A. And I need to raise it to the power small ci as well. So now let's look at this expression. So this is equal to g to the power summation CIRI, comma, g to the power summation CISI times g to the power summation CIRI X. And again, this summation is over A. Okay, and let's call this value to be some capital R. So this is just g to the power capital R, comma, g to the power summation CISI times g to the power capital R. So this is just an ordinary ciphertext in our system. And again, we can just use the decryption procedure to decrypt it. This value is also guaranteed to be small. Constant times constant is always a constant. Now let's look at problem 2. In problem 2 and problem 3 in this homework, they're very similar. So in problem 2, you have to design a solution for secure voting schemes. So you have n voters and you have k servers. And the protocol is as follows. So each voter has a vote V. So voter I has a vote Vi, which could either be 0 or 1. Okay, so let's say we are voting for some ordinance, pass or fail. Now each voter is supposed to send a single message to each server. And after that, the servers are supposed to be able to combine all the messages and learn exactly the sum of all votes, but not any individual vote. So how do we do this? First step is to choose a large prime, P, and P should be greater than N. Next, you use additive secret sharing. So you take the vote V and you split it into Vi2 up to Vi of k. Such that summation Vi of j equals Vi mod P. Okay, so this is a little bit different from XOR secret sharing. You cannot use XOR secret sharing here because you need to learn the sum of all votes. And using XOR secret sharing, you will end up getting only a single bit. So Vi j is sent to server j. So this is the voting procedure. Each voter is doing this. Now next, when the voting is finished, right? Server j will compute summation Vij for all I, the shares received from all the voters. And let's call this Vj. Okay, so now server j will broadcast Vj is broadcast. Then each server computes summation Vj for all j. And this is called V, and this will be the sum of all the votes. So what is V here? So note that V is actually equal to summation and this is just the sum of all the votes mod P. This is equal to actually summation Vi mod P. Okay, so just some modular arithmetic. is necessary here. And how do we solve the third problem? We just use Shami secret sharing as opposed to this additive secret sharing. And rather than summation, we will have the reconstruction of Shami secret sharing, which would be polynomial interpolation. Okay, and I think problem 4 and 5 were simple. Problem 4 was about green Bitcoin. So here the person who mines the current block will pick the problem for the next block. And that's clearly bad because a dishonest miner can pick a problem whose solution it already knows. And then I can just take over the whole blockchain. All future problems will be determined by me. I already know the solution, so I'll be the first to solve them. Okay, so I'll stop here for now. I'm still happy to answer more questions if there are.